My life had become the kind of tragic tale you'd hear in a mournful country song. I was divorced, penniless, jobless, and seething with anger at the world. 5 years invested in a woman I believed I'd grow old with, only to walk through the door one day and find her already packing, halfway gone. A month later, I lost my job, and it felt like the universe was determined to grind me down while I was already on my knees. I craved solitude, far from the well-meaning friends urging me to focus on myself or look for the silver lining. I didn't want platitudes. I wanted quiet, a void to escape into. So, when I stumbled upon a listing for an off-grid cabin deep in the Appalachian Mountains, it seemed like the perfect retreat. This wasn't a charming Airbnb getaway with a hot tub and fire petite. It was a bare-bones cabin hidden in the wilderness. The listing was brief. Remote. Off-grid cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. No cell service, no electricity. For those seeking true disconnection. There were no reviews. The photos were grainy, but the scenery looked stunning. It didn't even provide an exact location, just a general area and a contact number. Normally, I'd be cautious about something so vague, but I was beyond caring. I booked it for a full month, desperate to disappear. The owner was oddly firm that I couldn't drive there myself, explaining that the trails were too easy to lose and GPS wouldn't work that deep in the mountains. He arranged for a local guide to take me up, which made sense: mountain paths, rugged terrain, the risk of getting lost. It didn't seem unusual. I met the guide at a weathered general store about an hour from the nearest town. He was waiting when I pulled into the lot, leaning against an old ATV with a trailer attached. He looked like he'd lived in the woods his whole life, a quintessential park ranger who'd been at it a bit too long, with a grizzled beard and a faded flannel shirt. "You the renter?" he asked, eyeing me. I nodded, tossing my backpack onto the trailer. "Guess it's obvious." He grunted, climbed onto the ATV, and gestured to the seat behind him. "Hop on!" The ride up was brutal. The trail was little more than an overgrown deer path, full of sharp turns and steep drops. For an hour, we jolted over rocks and wove through thick forest, the ATV's engine growling as we climbed higher. Eventually, we reached a clearing where the path ended abruptly. "This is where we walk," the guide said, unloading my gear without fanfare. I stared at him. "How far is the cabin from here?" "A few miles." I hoisted my bag, zipped my jacket, and followed him into the dense woods. The hike took another hour, and with each step I realized just how isolated this place was. There was nothing, no roads, no trails, just an endless expanse of forest pressing in from all sides. I expected to hear birds chirping, insects buzzing, maybe a stream trickling in the distance, but at some point the woods fell silent. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you'd expect from nature, but an eerie, absolute stillness. I noticed the guide hadn't spoken in nearly 30 minutes, his face set in a grim line as he led the way. When the cabin finally appeared through the trees, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It was exactly what I'd hoped, for small, sturdy, a 2-story structure with a wood stove and a nearby creek for water. Just me, the trees, and miles of untouched wilderness. The guide dropped my gear on the porch and adjusted his cap. "You'll be fine," he said, breaking the silence at last. "As long as you don't stray too far." Without another word, he turned and vanished into the forest, leaving me alone. The first few nights were everything I needed. I woke with the sunlight streaming through the window, spent my days hiking, reading, and simply existing. For the first time in months, I didn't have my ex-wife's lawyer bombarding my inbox with demands I could breathe. But on the second night, I stepped outside to relieve myself and was struck by the depth of the silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was a void, pressing against my eardrums. I figured it was normal for the deep woods, recalling something I'd read about predators causing sudden silences when they pass through. Maybe a bear was nearby. I brushed it off, went back inside, and climbed into bed. By the fifth morning, I started noticing subtle changes. It wasn't anything overt at first, just a feeling that the landscape had shifted slightly. The bushes near the tree line looked disturbed, as if something had pushed through them. I chalked it up to deer there were plenty in the area. But as I approached, I saw the dirt was churned up, like something had been digging or scuffling around. Further along, I found deep scratches on a few trees, the grooves carved into the bark. I ran my fingers along them, unsure what bear claws might look like, but imagining this had to be a large one. That's when I felt the first twinge of unease, a gut instinct that something wasn't right, even as my rational mind tried to explain it away. I pushed the feeling down. Bears, deer, mountain lions. This was the wilderness. If I started panicking over every snapped twig or trampled bush, I'd drive myself mad. So I returned to the cabin, brewed coffee, and told myself to stop overthinking. But the unease lingered for the rest of the day, a quiet nag I couldn't shake. By the 12th day, I'd settled into the cabin's rhythm. The eerie silence had become familiar, and I convinced myself it was just how things were out here. I'd been living off canned goods and dry staples, but still had a decent stash of vegetables, rice, and seasonings. I decided to treat myself to a hot meal, a big pot of stew. I knew cooking outside in the wilderness was risky. Even with scent blockers, it wasn't foolproof. An animal might smell it and steal the whole pot. But I was craving something hearty, and if I lost the meal, so be it. I built a fire in the stone-ringed pit, set up my cast-iron pot, and tossed in everything I had, letting it simmer slowly with a heavy lid. For extra precaution, I wrapped the pot in a scent-neutralizing tarp, hoping to mask the aroma. Satisfied, I went inside, stretched out on the bed, and drifted off to the faint crackle of the fire outside. The next morning, I stepped outside and froze. The yard was a disaster. The ground had been ripped apart in massive patches, as if something had clawed or shoved through it with force. Clumps of dirt were scattered in wide arcs, like they'd been flung violently. The bushes near the tree line were crushed flat, some uprooted entirely, their roots exposed in tangled heaps. Several small trees were bent at odd angles, their bark scraped raw. I'd expected the pot to be gone, maybe tipped over with the food eaten. Instead, it was shattered, broken into pieces strewn across the yard. Bits of stew rice, carrots, potatoes were smeared into the dirt, as if something had deliberately flung them around. It looked like the pot had been lifted and smashed into the ground repeatedly, not by an animal looking for a meal, but by something throwing a fit. I stood there, gripping the porch railing, trying to make sense of it. A bear would have eaten the food. A raccoon might have rummaged through it. This felt different, angry, almost spiteful. I cursed under my breath, running a hand through my hair, frustration overtaking the unease. I'd been careful, and now I'd lost a good meal in my cast-iron pot. Wonderful, I muttered, bending to pick up the mess. For the next hour, I cleaned up, burying the ruined food deep in the woods and scrubbing the yard as best I could. As the sun dipped below the mountains, I sat on the porch, sipping from my flask, staring at the tree line. The night air was crisp, the forest stretching into an endless void beyond the lantern's faint glow. I strained to hear anything, half expecting another disturbance, but the silence held. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "That's what I figured," I said to the emptiness, then headed inside. I secured the shutters, stoked the fire, and climbed into bed, the faint smell of stew still clinging to my hands. Then the noise began. It started softly, a faint pressure in the earth outside, a long, dragging sound. I lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, heart rate climbing. Another step, then another. I wasn't imagining it. Something was walking through the yard, closer than anything had come in all my nights here. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate, not the scampering of a scavenger, but the stride of something large. I listened intently, tracking its movement. It wasn't the frantic rustling of a hungry animal searching for scraps. It was just walking, slow and steady. I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. Whatever had trashed my yard the previous night was likely back, looking for more food. But there was nothing out there this time. I smirked, rolling onto my side and pulling the blanket up. "Joke's on you," I muttered, closing my eyes. The footsteps grew closer, circling the cabin, the wood groaning under a massive weight as it stepped onto the porch. A deep, dragging inhale filled the air it was breathing. I could feel its presence through the walls, a suffocating pressure, like the cabin was compressing around me. For a long moment, there was silence, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. When the sun rose, I was desperate for answers. I grabbed my boots, stepped outside, and stopped dead. There, pressed into the damp soil, were tracks, massive bipedal prints, not the hoof prints of a deer or elk. I crouched, tracing the edges, feeling the compacted dirt, imagining the size of whatever left them. My mind buzzed with disbelief. These weren't from a four-legged animal. Something had walked upright. The trail led from the tree line to the porch, then vanished, as if it had disappeared into thin air. That night I couldn't sleep. I was done pretending this was normal. Whatever was visiting the cabin wasn't just scavenging. It was targeting me. I extinguished the fire early, doused myself in scent blocker, and sat in the dark with a knife, waiting. At 1:43 a.m., I heard its rhythmic, heavy footsteps crunching the dirt. I gripped the knife tighter, barely breathing. It approached the porch, the wood creaking under an immense weight. A deep, uneven breath echoed outside. I'd planned to peek through the window or confront it, but in that moment I froze. Whatever stood there wasn't a bear or deer, it was something unnatural, massive. Then, as suddenly as it arrived, it retreated, the footsteps fading toward the trees. But I knew it wasn't gone. It was waiting. I should have packed and fled at dawn, risking getting lost over staying another night. Instead, I made a plan to hide. The next night, I erased my presence as best I could, dousing myself in scent blocker, piling furniture against the bedroom door, and squeezing into the wardrobe with my rusted hunting knife. I sat in the dark, knees to my chest, breathing shallowly, waiting. It came at midnight, announcing itself with a hyena-like laugh that sent chills down my spine. A loud bang shook the cabin as the downstairs door splintered inward. Heavy footsteps followed, wood snapping, furniture shattering. It tore through the cabin with fury, sniffing deeply, searching. The sniffing stopped, replaced by a heavy creak outside the bedroom door. I held my breath, peering through the wardrobe slats. It ducked to enter, towering at least 8 feet tall, a grotesque amalgamation of creatures, like a patchwork of animal parts. Its long arms ended in human-like hands with double-jointed fingers, its body covered in matted fur except for a pale, scarred torso. Asymmetrical antlers sprouted from its skull, one twisted unnaturally. Its gaping mouth was filled with mismatched teeth, and where eyes should have been were only sunken patches of skin. Blind, yet it sniffed the air, jerking its head, sensing something. It lunged, not at me, but at the room, roaring as it tore the bed apart and toppled the dresser. Its hand slammed onto the wardrobe, shaking it. I pressed back, but it shoved the closet over, sending me crashing to the floor, the knife slipping away. I braced for death, but it shuffled, growled, and left. I lay in the wreckage, trembling until dawn. I fled the cabin as the sun rose, grabbing my backpack, flashlight, knife, and water, not caring about the guide's return or my remaining supplies. I couldn't stay another night. I tried retracing the guide's path, but the forest felt different, denser, darker, the landmarks uncertain. The oppressive silence returned, and I knew I was being followed, not hunted, but toyed with. Hours later, I stumbled into a clearing and saw a small, weathered village, old wooden buildings, a church steeple in the distance, untouched by modernity. Relief flooded me. I'd made it to civilization. But I turned back, and there it was, just beyond the tree-linear, motionless figure in the fading sunlight. As the last rays dipped below the mountains, it crouched, ready to run. I bolted into the village, bursting into an old general store, the bell jangling as I collapsed inside. The dusty air smelled of aged wood, lit by flickering lanterns. A few peoplemen in work jackets, a woman behind the counter, a boy by the stove turned to me with blank, curious expressions. Gasping, I pleaded, "I need help. Something's out there, in the woods." They stared silently, no questions, no surprise. The woman stepped forward, her voice calm and deliberate. "Did it follow you?"